FAU center Vlad Golden finally commits to the Michigan Wolverines. There was talk he was going to test out the NBA draft process. Maybe he still does that. We're not 100% sure what his plans are in that regard just yet, but he's coming to Michigan next year. And at the time he committed, all 13 scholarship spots were accounted for. George Washington III jumps in the portal later on in the day, so there is at least one spot still available. We'll see what happens with the likes of Jace Howard and Namari Burnett, but Vlad Golden, I mean, you talk about a big piece. I mean, literally and physically, one of the bigger pieces of the class, 6'1", 240 pounds, averaged 15.7 points, 6.9 rebounds per game last year, while shooting 67.3% from the field, which was the third best mark in college basketball. This guy's outstanding, and he is a night one starter for them, and the biggest piece that they brought into this point, maybe the linchpin of this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can't add a much bigger piece. He was a number, as you said, literally and figuratively, but number 2 center in the transfer portal. And like you said, I mean, it was very expected, but at the same time, I think Michigan fans are feeling, pretty relieved today, seeing as now he's finally in the fold. But nearly 16 points a game last year, 7 rebounds. I mean, he's got really good touch around the rim. He was in the 91st percentile in the country in post-up efficiency as well. Got a nice hook shot there. I mean, putbacks. He's a good, pick and roll guy. Slips to the basket. And block shots, defensively. Michigan hasn't had a great rim protector in quite a while. I would say Terrace Reed had the potential to be and showed that at times with, the way he could, block some shots. But Vlad Golden can really get after it on the defensive end. And, I think the most important position, at least maybe in the NBA, potentially in college, on defense is having a really good center that can protect the rim, because then you can do so much around that. And Vlad Golden allows you to do that. You have Danny Wolf there, the Yale transfer, who's also over 7 feet, as kind of a depth piece. And he's a different type of player in that he'll stretch the floor. Vlad Golden, despite the videos released by his dog, probably isn't going to be shooting many 3-pointers for Michigan this year. But he is a big pickup. And, as you said, kind of maybe the centerpiece of this team from a personnel standpoint.
And you look at it too, I know the immediate question, I think, with how frequently these commitments were coming in for Dusty May, I think a lot of people were kind of panicking that, oh, what's going on? Something's weird here. Is it an NIL thing? Is it have things cooled off? And that was never the case. I mean, I think throughout the whole process, pretty confident he was going to wind up here regardless. It was just more of a matter of when, not if. And maybe there are a couple more guys out there like that. I know Nelly Davis is a target that a lot of people are still very much keeping a close eye on what he's going to do. Again, I think that when you look at this roster and how it came together and how it has come together, I should say, again, I mean, really it's Vlad Golden and Reuben Jones are the only 2 guys, that committed over the last few weeks it's a one and done deal here. You've got good depth throughout. I think there's some good roster combinations that you can pull from all this. And the other question, and a lot of people, because he hasn't officially signed yet, maybe wondering what's going on with Danny Wolf. Again, we've heard nothing to suggest he's not going to sign with Michigan. So, and a lot of people seem to think both of those guys, despite being 7-footers, can play together because Wolf does have a little bit more of that stretch capability. So, what do you make of? Wolf isn't going to start at the 4. I think these guys in an ideal scenario are probably more of a 50-50 platoon. Maybe one skews more the other way, depending on the game, depending on the matchup. But I think we went from arguably this team not having a true center last year to having 2 really damn good ones potentially this season.
Yeah, I could see a few minutes overlapping between Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf at times, and I think we talked about this last week. Like a lot of it depends on who you're playing, like who they have out on the floor. The Big Ten has gotten a little bit smaller year by year. Lately, there is no longer, the Kofi Coburns. Obviously, they get quite a bit smaller with no Zach Edey next year. But, Hunter Dickinson's out of the league. Like, it's not as big man centric maybe as it was 2-3 years ago. So I don't know how many teams are going to have these massive lineups that will require Michigan to go with both Wolf and Golden, but I could see that, and maybe that was a selling point to Danny Wolf, who I agree with you. I don't think there's any concern there about him signing. But Vlad Golden, in his last season was the most minutes that he averaged per game, and it was 25. So if you're kind of around there, maybe a little bit less because it's a Big Ten, and you could take a little bit more of a toll on him, then I think you're right there with Danny Wolf, where they overlap for a couple minutes, and he's around 20, Vlad's around 25. And it's kind of that nice happy medium. So I think you're fine there. I think you'd still like to add another 4/ kind of an impact wing, or, best available guard. You look at the scholarship chart there, Namari Burnett is a guy who things have been pretty quiet on, although we pretty much expect at this point him to be back. And then Jace Howard entering his 5th season. I don't think that's a guarantee at all that he is going to return to Michigan. So they have a couple spots to work with. Things have been quiet after they reached out to a couple different guys over the last week or so, even after kind of filling out with that the rest of the roster with that string of commitments. So I'm interested to see what kind of guys they go after, and maybe there's somebody under the radar that we're not hearing about yet that will emerge, which I think will be interesting. We got the comment here from Joe X that says Dusty has made men's basketball interesting again. Program was dead in the water until Juwan. This guy has a plan and a way to go about it. He does have a plan, Anthony. I think that, they reach out to 40, 45 guys in the transfer portal, and, there were times, and he kind of had a great sense for who they were had a realistic chance with, who would want to visit, what of the visitors would want to commit, to the point where they were telling guys at certain positions that, hey, maybe take your visits elsewhere. I think we're full here. We have commitments, behind closed doors at this point. And, he just has handled this beautifully, I think. And I think one of the reasons why, too, just to get into what you alluded to earlier with everyone was kind of waiting on Vlad Golden and what's the holdup. I think he's making sure these guys wait until they announce their commitment, until they're fully good to go in terms of credits and graduating, depending on each certain situation. Vlad Golden is a grad transfer, and you can enter the portal as a grad transfer as long as you're on track to graduate that next semester, but it doesn't mean you do graduate, right? Just because you're in there as that. Classes ended on Friday at Florida Atlantic. They start final exams on Wednesday. So I'm guessing, this is just a guess here, but that he got the go-ahead basically like, hey, yeah, maybe it's kind of the thing we were all looking for when we were trying to graduate college, right? It's like, all right, if I fail my exams, am I still good? I'm not expecting Vlad to fail his exams, but maybe he was just waiting for those numbers to come through. I think we all have been there at one point or the other in our tenures as students.
Yeah, man, C's get degrees. And I didn't have to worry about getting into a school like University of Michigan, which people often use against me, but that's fine. Dusty has a plan, and I'm really hesitant to drag the guy that preceded him, but we've talked about the difference in roster building approach, and it's so apparent that this is a guy who said he was going to cast a wide net. He said that he was going to exhaust all options to be competitive this year because they have no interest in a multi-year rebuild. They have no interest in, waiting. Again, they're like some of the other Big Ten programs, you get these transfers in just to keep a seat warm for a year and then hope 3 or 4 years down the road that you've got a nucleus of something with the guys you recruit. No, I think this is an NCAA tournament team. And I'll stop short of saying that it's a national championship team or a team that can make a Final Four. But when you look at the, a latest round of Vegas odds that were released by, I believe it's FanDuel, they're at plus 4,500 ahead of Michigan State, who's plus 5,500. Now, I'll argue that
to win the Big Ten. To win it all. Sorry.
Men's basketball championship, which I assume that means Big Ten too. So again, it's
right.
Plus 4,500, plus 5,500. So it's negligible. They're not quite in the mix, so to speak. But when you look at this roster that he's put together, I don't know if they didn't add a single thing from here, and this is the team that you're going to put on the floor, and you're starting, Trey Donaldson, Roddy Gale. Let's say Namari Burnett comes back. You got Sam Walters at the 4. You've got Vlad Golden at the 5. That's a very good basketball team. That's a top half of the Big Ten, probably a top 5 or 6 roster in the conference. And I think for year one, that's you take that 10 times out of 10, because the flip side of that is, one, that you either ran it back with Juwan Howard, or two, that you couldn't quite land some of these guys you wanted to have. NIL was an issue. And then you're just hoping to kind of maybe be what Penn State was, which I think when we started this process, that was sort of maybe, I know, Clayton, you directly have cited that as what you thought the expectation would be. And that bar is, I think it's a little, I think it's much higher than that now. I think this is probably a team that at worst is on the NCAA tournament bubble.
Yeah. And no, you're right. I was thinking of writing about this too, because you, me, and Brian Bush, the voice of Michigan basketball, were sitting around talking after the press conference of Dusty May, his introductory press conference about a month ago. And we all kind of were talking about that Penn State comparison, right? They went, I think, one game under 500 or one game over, right around there. And, they brought Ace Baldwin from VCU, and, they showed signs of life, in the first year after being completely decimated roster-wise after Micah Shrewsbury left for Notre Dame, right? And they had all those one-year rent-a players that got them to the NCAA tournament, and that was a good, fun team with Jalen Pickett and all them. But they rebuild, they get around 500. I think that was kind of fair at the time, but that may have been all of us underestimating a couple things. One, Dusty May, so apologies for that. Two, the NIL situation. I was hesitant coming in about the results right away on what he would be able to do with NIL, and that's another thing that he's handled beautifully. And we've heard that he's doubled Michigan's pool of NIL this is 2 weeks ago to the day that we heard that. And that was, less than a month into his tenure. So it could go up from there. My guess is that he would be communicating to some of these guys he's bringing in that, yeah, here's an amount we can give you, but also there's going to be more on the way, because I'm planning on hitting the trail, talking to these donors. So when we say he has a plan, he has had a plan in pretty much every facet of being Michigan's head coach. And the expectations are going to be, pretty high in year one. Here's the thing too, like he talked about this on day one as well, where he said, we want to be competitive in year one so that we can build in the long term and have something to sell from year one. They want to look back when it's April 29th next year and say, we've become one of the hot teams in college basketball that people come to and have success at. And yeah, that's high schoolers, that's transfers. So part of the long-term build is actually to just have a really good year one, and then it'll go from there. And I think that is a really good plan. And again, I even may have underestimated their ability to do that with NIL and everything else that goes into building a roster. And that just speaks even more to how impressive things have been. And that doesn't even mention the staff he's put together, just the way that he's handling himself here as Michigan's coach.
Yeah, I was going to say, it goes beyond just building a roster. It's the program that he's built to this point, the infrastructure, the assistant coaches. It's not, again, it would have been fairly easy to just say, hey, staff from FAU, come on up to Ann Arbor and let's just run it back there. And that probably would have been fine. But he, just like he has done with the roster, cast a wide net there. You get a former Power 5 head coach and Mike Boynton on your staff. You've got Justin Joyner. You've got Akeem Miskadeen, who's a very good recruiter. So, a very good, and this is where I think I see a trait that he shares with Jim Harbaugh, is that the great ones realize that your success is dependent on the staff and the support people you put around you. And with the resources that Michigan has, with the connections that he not only has through, he's been coaching for what, 15, 20 years, or at least in the ranks, and knows people, you make contacts. I can't, without knowing what it's going to look like when this actually gets on the floor, these are just checkpoints. It's, you make the hire, and then you hire your staff, and then you acquire talent, you build the roster, and every checkpoint that he's hit so far, I think has been A++. This is a guy who is going to work tirelessly to turn this program around, and we'll see just to which heights he can bring it back to. But listen, I mean, when you have the work ethic that a guy like Dusty May does, that's the success that comes after it is not luck. It's the reward from all of those hours that you put in. And he strikes me as the type of guy that if there's a 24-hour day, he's going to get 36 hours worth of work in, or, just that extra hour somewhere he'll find to either get better as a coach, to make a couple more phone calls, to watch a little bit more film, whatever it is. I mean, this guy has worked pretty tirelessly to turn this around. And right now, I think we're looking at a team that I think has a chance to maybe not push for a Big Ten title next year, but I think it'd be pretty darn good.
Well, and it's not over yet, right? And in terms of what he's going to bring into the roster, and I don't see why, I'm not afraid to say that they could or can or should push for a Big Ten championship. One, I don't think the Big Ten was really all that good last year outside of Purdue, and they proved to be very good. They're going to have a drop off. Other teams are going to fall off a little bit. I think Indiana is going to be good, but I also said that coming into last year, I didn't realize they would have literally no one that could make a jump shot on their entire team. But, so everyone's in their own unique situation. Like Michigan's not the only team that had to rebuild things on the fly. And I think Michigan's done as good a job as anybody at that. They sit at number 1 right now and on three's transfer portal rankings that just came out today. And those factor in transfers in and transfers out. And it's not all about transfers in, transfers out, right? Because other teams have some better players that are coming back and some better high school recruits that are coming in. But I think it's important to know. So I'm not afraid to say that they can do that. And if they make the NCAA tournament like I expect they can, I'm also not afraid to say that there's a chance, I'm not predicting this, but there's a chance they could make the second weekend, Final Four, that sort of thing. I know it's April 29th. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but nobody thought they were getting to the Final Four even after winning over 30 games, or I guess it was right at 30 or 31 before they made the Final Four 2 years ago at Florida Atlantic as a 9 seed. So college basketball, you really can't rule a ton out as long as you're competitive and you put yourself in position to make a run. So again, it's April 29th, but it feels like I wish the season was here. Sounds like the guys are getting on campus June 10th, the transfers, and then the freshmen on June 22nd. So, there's still a ways to go before they start to gel and come together. But man, I think everybody's excited to get this thing in place and see what these guys can do. And someone said this on the message board earlier. It would have been a great year for Michigan to have one of those overseas trips to Europe. You can only do it once every 4 years, and they did it in 22. So it doesn't line up, but this would have been a perfect year because the excitement of them beating up on some terrible team in Italy would be through the roof at this point in a couple months.
Josh Jackson with a $1.99 super chat says, "Two best in the business, go blue," as Clayton pulls it down there. Thank you, Josh. That's extremely sweet. We're very fortunate. We have a great staff over here.
Talk to this guy right here, AB.
Talk to this guy. That's right. I don't like the praise. I mean, I appreciate the praise. Just give it. Make sure you spread the wealth, and he has. Thank you, Josh, very much.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, I think a couple quick points on this, and then we'll move on to the NFL draft. The fact that, again, maybe there's a lingering piece or two out there somewhere. There's still decisions to be made. I get that, but the fact that the core of this team is more or less set, and we'll see. We'll get some guys signed this week, I assume, to make that official. The fact that you're going into the summer knowing what you have, I think, is very important. Where it feels like even before last offseason, the offseason before, you're still waiting on guys to commit. Yusuf Kayat was the guy that literally joined them on the Europe trip a couple of years ago. So again, it just the speed at which they've worked all this out has been pretty remarkable, and it's going to be interesting. And I talked about talked about this with Andy Backstrom of Letterman Row, our Ohio State site, last week. There's kind of this interesting subplot where it's now a what if. What if Ohio State had hired Dusty May? What if Michigan did? Ohio State obviously hires Jake Diebler. With Roddy Gale coming to Michigan, we know what the storylines are with those two football programs, but I'm going to be really interested in seeing how it goes with Michigan basketball and Ohio State basketball over these next 2 or 3 years. I think it's going to be really just a fascinating storyline. But any other final thoughts on hoops? Yeah,
I just wanted to add to your point about having the roster set before the summer. Olivier Kamwa committed on June 7th, 2023. They didn't know they were going to have pretty much their best player, right? Doug or him, you could argue, until June 7th. And even then he went over and, he came to Ann Arbor, and then he went over, to, I think it was Japan, for the FIBA under 19 games or whatever it was, the World Cup. So, they didn't have that. And Juwan Howard was dealing with health things throughout the offseason. Like, they're just in such a better position right now than they were a year ago.